Hello, hello, creatives. Welcome back. So, in this episode, I'm going to talk about the need for validation, and particularly when it comes to validation that we're creative, that we're an artist, validation that our creations are good enough, beautiful, accepted, loved. That is just a human need, is to be validated. So, validation can come on many different levels. And let's talk first about getting validation by selling our artwork, right? I get a lot of clients and students to ask me, should I sell my artwork? And that's a really good question because I think it's pretty typical that when we're creating art, we think, well, maybe we need to sell our work after we create, get better at art. It's almost like this natural pull that is something that we need to do. And maybe it's sort of the rite of passage as an artist. And I think it's a natural curiosity or even a natural progression in your artistic life, in your creative journey. So I wanted to just put that out. If you're thinking about selling your art, that's exactly where you should be if you've come to a place where now you feel like your art is good enough to sell. But when I hear my clients ask me that, or my students ask me that, the first question that comes up for me is, and what I present to them is, well, what are you hoping to get out of selling your work? And often it's really hard for them to answer that because selling your work should be a personal choice. It should be a preference. Because now I'm going to again separate the difference between if you're a professional artist and this is what you're doing as your primary income, this is your career, yes, you have to sell your work, right? But if for some reason you haven't done anything like this, maybe you're just doing it on the side, you have a job, maybe you're retired and you're doing this on the side and you're thinking about entering some art festivals or even submitting your work to some artist calls. That's when I ask, what are you trying to achieve by selling your work? Because what happens is we really need to dig deep inside of us to ask that question because the intention may not necessarily match up to where we're at in our development, or maybe where we're going is more important to think about. Because sometimes what happens is if we're not thinking about where do we want to end up as an artist, what do I want to do with my art, where do I see myself in terms of the 5 years down the line, if you can honestly and answer that question and say, well, I really love doing it and I have so many pieces hanging around. I really just want to gift it to people in a way, and I can only give so much away as gifts, and I just want to get rid of my inventory, right? Because that can be definitely one of the intentions or the primary reasons you want to sell your art, and that's totally fine. I'm kind of in that position too. I have so much creations that I don't know what to do with, and storing it becomes an issue, and I definitely want to just get it out in the world. So getting it out in the world can be another reason why you want to sell your work. And that's great. It's especially if you feel like you kind of want to share your creations with the world, which I think is important. You don't want to hide your creations in the closet, right? After you create it, you just stick it away because you're too afraid to share it with the world. I say it's important that you find a way to share it because it's a big step and also a vulnerable step to get to a place where you're ready to share the work with the world, whether it's through Instagram or through an art festival or a gallery. If you're at that point, that's great. So one of the reasons you want to sell your work is because you want to get it out in the world, right? Now, the reason why I asked that question is because, and then, getting back to why do I want to sell my work, sometimes people want to sell their work because they want to make money, right? Sometimes people want to sell their work to get the validation. So that is where it's a slippery slope. Because if you want to sell your work because you're looking for the validation from the buyer, and trust me, I've been there myself. I felt like I put so much weight on getting the validation of from the buyer. So in other words, if somebody bought my work, if somebody loved my work or liked my work enough to buy it, that was a huge validation. And that is valid. But when that becomes the only reason why you want to sell it, and then when you don't sell it, you don't feel validated, that is something you need to think about. Because I think it's important to realize that the validation for yourself as an artist, for yourself as a creative, should come from you first. In other words, the validation that you create beautiful art that you love, should first come from you. And what does that mean? That means that you need to approve of your work first. It's very important that you are not trying to get the approval from outside of yourself first in order to confirm or affirm that you are creative, that you're talented, and that you're an artist. That's very important because if you do rely on the outside world to give you that validation, to confirm that, that's going to be kind of a slippery slope. I mean, that you're not, one day you'll be fine, the next day you won't. And, the reason why I talk about this is because I've been there myself, where, wow, I was in an art show and I didn't sell anything. And that kind of really took a beating on my self-confidence. And then it surfaces the self-doubt. Like, am I, I don't know what I'm doing. Is my work good enough? Or an art festival where people just kind of pass by my table, my booth, and don't even, take a second look. That's, and then I walk away from that situation feeling a little bit, deflated. So that's really important that you don't succumb to that every time you get rejected or someone doesn't buy your art or you do an art festival and you sell nothing. It's very important that you take a realistic look at what you're creating, why you're creating it, and that you're creating it for you first and foremost. So when I say creating it for you, I mean you create it because it brings you joy. The whole process of making it brings you joy. Or maybe the technique that you're experimenting brings you joy, fulfillment. That is the most important thing and most important validation. That it brings you joy, that doing something creative is rewarding. It also, gives you fulfillment in your life so that you can turn to that creation to work on and get lost in, and then also that it feeds you back, and also that what you're creating you fall in love with. So that's what's important in terms of validating it, is that you need to validate yourself first as an artist. So that's really what I think is important, especially if you're considering selling your work. You really got to ask yourself, what am I hoping to gain from selling my work? And also, can I be okay if I don't sell or if I get rejected? Because when you do make that next move, and if you do choose to, which I think is great, because if you do decide that is the next step for you in your creative journey and development, that means you have a confidence that you're ready. But really ask yourself, am I going to be okay if I do get rejected? Because hitting the pavement, submitting a bunch of submissions to art calls, trying to get into a gallery or a group show can be challenging, because rejection is just part of the process, and you can get a lot of rejection before you get acceptance, right? So this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this, is because I've been there, and I do remember really wanting that validation from the outside world, and it could be validation from the people, my friends and family, validation that I'm accepted into a gallery, from my fellow artists who are in the group show, from from the buyers, people who become my collectors. There's always that little sense of need to be validated. So, but I got to a place where I no longer needed that I could find that stamp of approval, that affirmation, I could find in simply the process of creating, and simply in what was unfolding on the surface and what the artwork was becoming. And that in itself was validating. It was not only fulfilling, but it was validating to me when I'd come up with something that I had struggled with, sometimes for weeks, months, and then it would do a complete turnaround and turn into something totally unexpected. And then I found myself falling in love with it. Like, wow, that really is cool. I like that. And that was validating enough for me. I didn't feel the need to sell it. Now, the thing too is I've been in those situations where, okay, now I got accepted into a group show, and now I feel this pressure to create pieces in a body of work that's going to be acceptable or approved of or sell. And that's a lot of pressure. And I find this is something really important to remember, that if you are creating from that place, your creative spirit is going to know. If you're creating with the intention of needing approval, needing to sell, and it's a place of desperation, and maybe a place of feeling like, well, I'm not okay, or I'm not creative unless I get that stamp of approval, creative spirit knows it. And then, in my experience, the creative process almost digs its heels in the ground and completely stops that flow of energy, that flow of creative energy. And then I find it more and more difficult to create something from that authentic place, from that flow place, because I'm forcing it, or I'm forcing it to become something that will sell or get that validation. So I have found that can happen also, and that's why you really need to become aware of when you are approaching the creative process, that you're creating from a place of authenticity, that you're creating from a place of enjoyment. And not that you have to be enjoying it all the time, because I know it can be frustrating sometimes, challenging. Sometimes we hit a brick wall, but that you are doing it because you love the art, right? You really do love the feeling that you feel when you create something. So I think that's just something to think about in terms of validation. Also, I believe that validation can be a catalyst for our relationship with the audience, right? Because we have the audience in the back of our minds when we're creating, whether you're an actor, a singer, a musician, an artist, or writer. We kind of have the audience in mind in terms of, well, how are they going to experience this creation? What are they going to think? And sometimes, what do I want to communicate to the audience or to the viewer who's going to be experiencing this piece of art, reading this novel, listening to this piece of music? Sometimes the artist wants to communicate something and create an experience. And that alone is meaningful. It adds meaning to the creative process, but it also helps bypass that need for validation because you're focused on, what do I want to share? What experience do I want to create for the audience, the viewer? And then that becomes the intention and the primary motivation and energy around your creation. So validation can be like I said, it can be a really sticky thing because sometimes, and it's normal, I think sometimes we'll catch ourselves. And I've seen this happen where my students would be creating something in class, in the workshop, and I could tell that they want the validation of the teacher, me, right? And I'm very aware of that. I'm very respectful of that because I know that is also part of your creative development, is that you need to hear that validation. That's different because I believe if it's coming from a safe place, now this is the reason why I think I've talked about this before. If the person that you want validation from is someone you respect, you feel safe with, who won't be negative or critical, who you trust their opinion and their experience, and you want that validation, I think that's a very normal need. And I think it's also very important to get that from the people who will be nurturing and supportive and encouraging to you as a creative person, as an artist, and who respects your journey. Because you might be at the early stages and you want that validation to say, am I doing okay? Can I keep going? Right? And that's important. So I've seen that happen in my workshops, and when I do recognize that's what's happening, I'm always very careful to be careful of that because I know that it could be a pivotal moment in their creative journey. So oftentimes I will hear my students make fun of me because I say the therapeutic thing. Well, what do you think? Right? And the reason why I do that is because I want that validation to come from within the student, within themselves, because I believe it exists there. And sometimes they'll say, well, I do kind of like this part, but I'm not sure about that. Or I'm really liking this, but I'm afraid to mess it up. And then it often, it commonly ends up that the very thing that they're liking and the very thing that they think they might want to change is the same thing that I would have selected as well. But I love the fact that it's coming from them. So it's important to think about what ways can you provide validation for yourself when it comes to your creation, so that you're not so reliant on that's outside of you. So a good way to do that is, pulling all the artwork that you've created, pieces or your creations. Maybe you have multiple that's just sitting around. Maybe there's some that's completed. Maybe there's some that are in the process. Maybe there's some that you haven't touched in a long time. But pull those out and take a look at them as a whole. You will begin to see aspects of each one of them that really validates you as an artist. And usually those are aspects that you love, that you got excited about in the moment. And maybe you're excited all over again because you forgot about them and now you're looking at them after, with fresh eyes, and you're saying, gosh, I remember that piece really was a pain in the butt, but now when I look at it, I really love it. And that is validation that's coming from within you. So if, and I may be going on a tangent right now because I don't have an outline for this, but I thought I just wanted to talk about the need for validation, and also the importance of considering, if you're considering selling your art, especially during this time of year. I know a lot of artists join some art festivals and holiday boutiques because they want to sell their creations. Be prepared for moments when you may not sell as much as you had hoped, or moments when you might feel a little deflated after the art festival's over. Be prepared for that, because remember, you will maybe try several different avenues of showing your art and selling your art. It could be an art gallery, a group show, an art festival. You need to find your tribe, because art is objective. Not everyone will relate to your art, and subjective. I always get those two mixed up. Not everybody's going to relate to your art in the way that you relate to your art, and not everybody's going to get it. And you'll know who is the audience that you are creating for. So remember, just because you did maybe one art festival, maybe the crowd or the audience, and this is what's important, is know your audience. If your artwork doesn't fit in that particular group, you most likely may not sell your work, or you might not get that appreciation or validation that you'd hope for. And a really good example of this is, for example, when I was looking for an art collective to join, I was very selective on doing, finding a group that would actually contain artists that would get my work. Artists that also did very similar work, like mixed media, abstract, were open to using different types of materials. And I looked for a group that had that, because I know that that would not only support me, but that I didn't feel out of place. And also when we did showings together, it would draw audience that would appreciate the type of work that I did. So, for example, I wouldn't want to belong to a group or submit to a group show that had primarily realistic landscapes, for example, or plain art, because that's not my style. It's not my type of artwork, and my work it would just stand out. And most likely, I may not get a lot of validation showing my work with artists that primarily did that type of stuff. So that's the kind of stuff you need to think about, is, does my artwork fit with this audience? Because that will most likely bring you the validation that you're looking for. Okay? So that's one thing to think about as well. But what's important is, what's another thing that's important is, if you are just starting out with your artwork and you're new to it and you're still learning, remember, that's temporary, because the better that you get, the more that you practice, the more you create, you are going to be moving into different phases of your creative development, your artistic journey or career. You're going to feel the need for less and less validation. Here are the inspiring words that serve as a good reminder to all of us. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your inner voice. Steve Jobs. Now, don't get me wrong. I think a certain amount of validation is essential and important. Because when you do sell your art or somebody does buy what you created, it's a boost, and it can also fuel your creative inspiration to continue creating, to continue doing what you love to do. So, selling your art can be also a lot of fun. My point is, I don't want you to feel like it's reliant on that your affirmation to create. In other words, the permission to be creative, the permission to continue to create what you love to do should not be reliant on that validation. And also, I think getting the validations from the people that you trust and care about, that we need that. We need a little bit of the validation from the people that love us, that care about us, that support us, that believe in what we do, are little stepping stones to that confidence. And I believe that over time you can develop that confidence. But sometimes we do need those little bits and pieces of validation to get us to the next level in terms of really believing in what we do and in our creative work. Because one believes in oneself, one doesn't try to convince others. Because one is content with oneself, one doesn't need others' approval. Because one accepts oneself, the whole world accepts him or her. Lao Tzu. Another thing I want to mention is this is not about the need for validation is wrong. The need for validation is perfectly normal and natural, because I think a lot of creatives, artists, writers, actors, musicians go into creativity. Originally, they went into it at a young age because it was a way to get the validation from mom and dad or the people who are caring for them, because maybe somewhere down the line they didn't feel enough in the world, or they didn't get that nurturing and approval and that positivity in their life. That's a lot of us, right? Many creatives lacked that in their childhood. So it's perfectly natural to want to create art that would give them that validation, because people started noticing them, or people started to, affirm them, that they existed, that they did something cool, that they, were important, and most importantly, that they mattered and they were valuable. So that can stem, the need for validation can stem all the way back to our childhood. And if that is the case, which is mostly us creatives, that's I think there was a book called The Gifted Child, and it talked about that, the very experience in our early development leads us to be the artists that we are today. So all of that stuff is what motivated us to create to begin with, and then also can become the thing that gets in the way where we're so reliant on the validation of others. So that's also something that I wanted to consider and also help you think about. Because if that is the case and you feel weighted down by some of those experiences in your early childhood, that's something that maybe you need to work on, you need to process so that you can feel like you can move beyond that and develop more confidence around yourself as an artist and more confidence and groundedness around your creations. So that might be something that you want to dive deep into and process and become aware of. So that's something to think about also. So I thought I'd talk about that because I think that's important. I always hear people saying, "Should I sell my work?" And I always ask them, ask yourself, what are you hoping to get out of selling your work? So that's something to think about. I know I'm going to make this short because I wanted to make sure to get a podcast, an episode out this month, as this month is going by very quickly. So thank you for listening. Please check out my YouTube video of my YouTube video version of this. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or iheartradio or Spotify, you can also check out the video version of this episode as well. And if you are watching, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I hope you enjoy listening, and I hope you're getting a lot out of my episodes. I look forward to my next episode, and sometimes there's so many things that I want to talk about, but there's almost so much time in the day, so I try to get what I can get out. So thanks for listening, and I hope you stay creative, and if you're discouraged in any way, please watch my other videos or listen to my other episodes, because one of the things that I love doing with this podcast is providing that support and encouragement so that you don't give up in your creative journey and you don't give up creating. So until next time, stay creative. Bye.